Some manufacturers have established such a good reputation that they can slap their badge on a piece of cardboard and still expect it to sell like hotcakes. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Other manufacturers have to work a bit harder to even be considered. Case in point, the Maxus G50. Because despite their British heritage, Maxus had to throw everything they had at this to make it a compelling choice. The question is that enough? Now, I know looks are subjective, but let's face it, some cars are undeniably ugly. Fortunately, the Maxus G50 isn't one of them. Because there's a fine line that designers have to tread to make a car look exciting without going over the top. And with the Maxus G50, I think they got it right. Now, I'm no expert when it comes to design, but as far as I'm concerned, the right formula is to keep the overall structure and body line simple and put the sophistication in the details, and not the other way around. At the front, you have these strong straight lines that give it a meaner look. There's the sleek grille complemented by this huge air dam. In terms of exterior kit, you get LED headlights, DRLs, and this front lip that won't do much for your approach angle, but boy does it look good. Along the side, you have these huge windows that extend all the way to the back to give it a floating roof design. Power side mirrors have turn indicators and are mounted on the doors to give you better visibility. There are also body lines to keep the massive panels from looking like a flat wall. The G50 rolls on 17-inch wheels that to me look a bit too fuzzy. At the back, you get these horizontal LED tail lamps. And like most of the panels of the G50, this rear door is huge, so it really helps to have a power tailgate. You'll see that there's a decent amount of cargo room even with the third row seats up. But if you want more space, you can always ask your mother-in-law to hitch a ride with someone else. So at this point, you may already be impressed, but just wait until you see the interior. Think of any feature or creature comfort, and chances are the G50 has it. Like Roy Orbison's song, anything you want, you got it. Okay, that's not even a Tito reference, that's already boomer territory. But to drive my point home, you get power seats, automatic climate control, and LCD multi-information display which gives you useful information such as your tire pressure and fuel mileage. You also get this 12.3-inch infotainment system with 360 camera, an electronic park brake with auto brake hold, a wireless charge pad, leather seats, and a panoramic sunroof. But it's not just the bells and whistles that makes this interior so appealing. The build quality is pretty good too. Nothing feels flimsy and all buttons and switches are nice to the touch. You also get soft padded materials on the dash and on all touch points. Ergonomics is also well thought of as everything is within reach and easily accessible. Now, one of the perks of sitting in the G50 are these huge windows and a relatively low belt line, so even the passengers get treated to nice outward visibility. Now, some were disappointed that the G50 didn't come with captain seats, but for me, that's a non-issue because these seats are still extremely comfortable and there's a lot of adjustability. Plus, you get these center armrests and heaps of space. You also get rear climate controls, charge ports, numerous air vents, and these foldable tables. What sets the G50 apart from other three-row vehicles is the fact that you can fit up to 3 passengers back here, and it's actually quite roomy. Now, you can only access the third row from the right side of the vehicle, but that's fine because that is the side facing the curb. So think of it as a safety feature. The G50 won't make your third row passengers feel left out because they also get a charge pad, cup holders, and rear air vents. So the G50 is built on a monocoque or unibody platform, which leads to a number of advantages. Mainly because a unibody platform is considerably lighter than a body-on-frame platform. And when you get weight savings, that leads to better acceleration and better agility. But anyone would be remiss to expect this to accelerate or handle like a sports car. But that still doesn't excuse it from feeling unresponsive or numb towards driver's inputs. So as far as driver's inputs are concerned, let's first talk about steering. And in the G50, the steering makes the car feel a lot smaller than it actually is. Because it's so light, and yet the ratio is pretty quick. Plus, it also gives a good amount of feedback. There are some steering racks that feel really light to a point that they almost feel disconnected from the front wheels. But that isn't the case here. You know exactly where the wheels are pointing. So next, let's talk about throttle inputs, or how this thing accelerates. Gonna give it some gas here. Wow. I wasn't expecting that. So this thing accelerates pretty well considering how big it is. Now, this only has a 1.5 liter engine, but let's not forget that it's turbocharged. And it pumps out 169 horsepower and 250 newton meters of torque. The best part about that is that peak torque comes in at 1,700 RPM and stays there until 4,300 RPM. So there's always power on demand. So if you're just putting around town or accelerating hard, this thing is pretty satisfying. And what I love the most about this thing's power delivery is how it doesn't taper off as you get higher up in the revs. It just gets faster and faster. So you can still have some fun in this thing, despite it being an MPV. And don't get me wrong, the acceleration isn't brutal. There's still a sense of refinement there. But the good thing is, when you put your foot down, the car will always respond to your throttle inputs, which makes driving very predictable. Then there's the transmission, which in this case is a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. And that means that the gear shifts are very quick. However, it does tend to jerk a bit at very slow speeds, but it's nothing jarring, at least as far as this test drive is concerned. And it's nicely tuned because it's quick to downshift when you put your foot down. And it will go all the way to the red line if you allow it to. Next, let's talk about the brakes. And for something this big, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to make it stop. And the pedal feel is very good because pedal travel is very shallow, yet it's linear. It's not like an on and off switch. So that also makes it very predictable and very nice to drive. So as far as fuel consumption is concerned, this thing will net about 7 to 8 kilometers per liter in the city. And then when you stretch its legs, it'll do about 13 to 15 kilometers per liter on the highway. So, not stellar, but it isn't bad. Now this has a turning radius of 5.7 meters. And that's not the tightest turning radius, but for something this long, it's actually quite acceptable. But more importantly, this thing isn't hard to maneuver because you have really good visibility, responsive steering, and a 360 camera, which really helps. But an MPV needs to do more than just satisfy the driver. In fact, it has to ensure that the occupants are well taken care of as well. And when it comes to ride comfort, the G50's ride is a bit on the stiff side, but by no means is it uncomfortable. It actually helps make the car feel more planted, which again is to the advantage of the driver. But the passengers won't have to pay the penalty either. Another thing that adds to this pleasant driving and riding experience is the fact that it's so quiet in here. NVH is very good. You can hardly hear anything from the outside. And even when you accelerate hard, the engine noise isn't intrusive. Overall, this vehicle does exactly what you tell it to do. And that is always a good thing. So if you're in the market for a vehicle with 3 rows, you really can't go wrong with a G50. And I'm almost willing to bet that this is one of the most refined and comfortable MPVs out there. Hell, it might even be one of the most refined and comfortable vehicles with 3 rows. Because compared to anything with a body on frame platform, I'm sure this is better as far as driving dynamics are concerned. And when it comes to the smaller MPV offerings, this just offers more space and more luxury. And of course, more refinement. So if you have any doubts about this vehicle, you really need to drive it. At 1,288,000 pesos, the G50 offers great value for money. You get decent driving dynamics and features that were once wishful thinking at this price point. And then there's the question of reliability. And I'm not going to comment on that in the same way I don't comment on any car's reliability, regardless of where it's made. Why? Because I'm not psychic. So if you want to know more about reliability, maybe you can ask Madame Auring. No car is immune to fault, regardless of where it's made. But I do understand the skepticism behind Chinese cars, because not too long ago, they were making pieces of turd on wheels. But they've come such a long way since then. And if you base it on this car's perceived quality, you'll actually be reassured. And for those of you who will dismiss this car solely because it's made in China, well, that's sad, because you're missing out.